I'd like to introduce our candidates. On my immediate left, we have Robert Dold, Congressman, and he is the Republican candidate, and Brad Schneider is the Democratic candidate, and they are running for the 10th Congressional District. The candidates participated in a coin toss, and the winner who decided to go first is Congressman Dold.
Well, thank you so much, and I want to thank Lake Forest and Legal and voters for their help in putting this together. When I decided to run for Congress as a small business owner, it was because I felt Washington was making it harder and harder for me to put the key in the door and open up my business each and every day. Frankly, it should be quite the opposite. They should be making it easier for me to open up my business, easier for me to employ that next individual. That and the idea of the amount of money that was being spent. And both the Republicans and the Democrats were overspending, truly jeopardizing the American dreams for my children and yours. I've set forth a clear vision for my Main Street Jobs agenda, enabling us to be able to work together, to be able to put our economy back on track and get more people back to work. Worked hard to try to make sure that we're getting more loans out to small businesses. Worked across the aisle to try to make sure we're creating an environment where more people are going back to work. I've worked hard and am proud to stand up for women's health. I've worked hard in terms of trying to make sure that we're protecting clean air and clean water and the jewel of our ecosystem in the Great Lakes. I fought for mass transit and against my own party in order to try to make sure that we have those funding dollars here. I also have worked with the administration to try to make sure that we're ending corruption for felons like Governor Robert so that they don't receive a taxpayer-funded pension. And I also work with those on the other side of the aisle to make sure that we've got sanctions for Iran. I'm proud to be rated as one of the most independent bipartisan members in the United States Congress, and I'm pleased to have received the endorsement of the Chicago Tribune and Daily Herald this week. We have thoughtful independent leadership in the district, and we'll continue to do so with my leadership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. 4 years ago, this time we remembered that the economy was in free fall. Lehman had failed, we were all scared. Everyone was worried about the future. Today we've made progress, but there's still a long way still to go. Here in Illinois, families continue to struggle. Skilled workers still have a hard time finding jobs. For too many families, college education is further and further out of reach. It's hard to save, it's even harder to retire. And yet in Washington, we see a Tea Party-controlled Congress that continues to put ideology and screaming ahead of tackling the real challenges we face. I'm in this race because for the first time, the promise to our children and their generation that their future will be brighter than what our parents left to us is in doubt. If it weren't so important, we could let the politicians in Washington fight it out, while we focus about our business here at home. But it is critically important, and the critical work that needs to get done isn't getting done in Washington. We need to change the way business is done. I've spent my career working with businesses, some large, but mostly small and medium-sized family businesses. I understand why simplifying our tax code is so important. I know that when we need to give confidence in the future so business owners can invest in innovation, hire new people, and get this economy growing again. I know that we have to do a different way in Washington. We need to change the way things are done, and I'm committed to do just that.
The first question will go to Mr. Dold. What is your viewpoint on current immigration policy?
I think that as we look at immigration policy, we talk oftentimes about comprehensive immigration reform, which oftentimes gives people an opportunity to vote against comprehensive immigration reform. I've said all along that I think that the DREAM Act, which has gotten so much attention as of late, is a step in the right direction. Generally in our country, we judge people on their merits, as opposed to something that their father or mother has done. People that know no other country besides the United States, I do think that there's an opportunity for us to give them a way to serve our country and be able to stay here in the United States. I've also offered legislation with regard to immigration, and this will help with jobs. When we have people that come over, we educate the best and the brightest from all over the world. And then when they graduate with an advanced degree in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what do? We send them home to compete against us. And what we want to do is say, we'd like you to stay here, innovate here, create American jobs here. So I do think that there's a lot of work that can be done, and I'm pleased to have been a bipartisan co-sponsor of legislation to keep them here.
We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to bring the 11 million people here out of the shadows who are contributing to the economy and allow them to do it in a way that provides for their family and helps our communities. We need to give them a pathway to citizenship that doesn't prejudice the people who have waited patiently at the border. We need to make sure we secure our border. I stand with the President in fighting for the DREAM Act. I agree with Mr. Dold. It is a shame to waste the resources and innovation and creative capacities of young people who come here as young children, go to our schools, have the potential to contribute to our communities, and yet we don't give them the resources to go get the education they need to do just that. It is a shame that we take engineers who graduate from foreign countries and send them away rather than giving them the opportunity to innovate here, make things here, and ship it around the world. So we need to reform our immigration policy.
Okay, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Schneider, for the next question, and then we'll alternate after that. Do you support drilling in Lake Michigan?
I do not support drilling in Lake Michigan, under any circumstances whatsoever. Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes account for 20% of the fresh water on this earth. 30 million people in this country rely on the Great Lakes for their fresh water. We cannot allow drilling in Lake Michigan under any circumstances, under any conditions. Unfortunately, my opponent did vote to allow drilling in Lake Michigan. This is something that I would not have done. We need to make sure that Lake Michigan is preserved. We need to make sure that our environment is protected. This Congress has voted over 300 times against the environment. They argue that we need to make a choice between protecting our environment and providing a legacy to our children and creating jobs. But the fact of the matter is, by investing in alternative energy, investing in conservation, we can create the jobs we need and we can lead the world in a critical area of addressing our environmental concerns. I think it's preposterous to think that I want to drill in Lake Michigan. As an Eagle Scout and a Scoutmaster, first of all, let me just say, 2005 Energy Policy Act, it is illegal today to drill in Lake Michigan, and will remain to be illegal as long as I am your congressman. The first bill that I introduced was the Great Lakes Water Protection Act, a bipartisan bill with Congressman Dan Lipinski, Senator Durbin, and Senator Kerr. I voted to increase GLRI funding, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I've been awarded the Congressional Outdoor Champion 2 years in a row. That's by Wilderness Society, the Outdoor Alliance for Kids, Conservation Lands Foundation, the National Wildlife-Based Foundation, and the Sierra Club. Actually, I got a letter, and this was after the bill that he was talking about, from the Sierra Club. Many of you may have received it as well. It was sent out on Saturday, the 25th of February, from Ann Messenkoff, that said, last week the House of Representatives passed the 2012 big oil wish list that opens up drilling off our coast and public pristine lands in the Arctic National Wildlife, but your Representative Bob Dold stood firm against big oil's pressure and voted no on the worst environmental bill of the year. Call and thank him.
We're taking time away from the debate by doing that. We're going to switch to foreign policy for a couple of questions. Mr. Schneider, do you agree that making Israel a partisan issue is bad for the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Israel is the only issue, or one of the few issues, where we see in Congress true collaboration and bipartisanship. The U.S. Senate can vote 100-0 in favor of support for Israel's security and a special relationship, the unbreakable bond between our country and Israel. Israel's security is in our national interest in a very dangerous region. Part of the success of the relationship with the United States and Israel is because of that bipartisanship. To attack me, as some have, to say anything other than I am a lifelong defender of the U.S.-Israel relationship, an inaugural member of the AIPAC New Leadership Network, involved in AIPAC since college, a member of the new AIPAC Congressional Club, recognizing all of the work I have done in Congress, is, to borrow a word, preposterous. We need to preserve the relationship between the United States and Israel, we need to do it in a way that is bipartisan. To do it any other way is bad for Israel, it's bad for the United States, and it's bad for our community.
Let me say that I think that the U.S.-Israel relationship, the strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship rests with the Congress. There's no question, this is not left versus right, it's right versus wrong. And let me just say that my commitment to the people of the 10th District was that I would not be just a vote, I would be a voice. I have a record of leadership, trying to make sure that we're preserving and protecting the U.S.-Israel relationship, that it's strong, that the world knows that the United States will stand shoulder to shoulder with our one true ally. Where the difference may lie is in just diplomacy. And frankly, there are those organizations and groups out there that are advocating that we not have all options on the table. I think we have to have a credible military threat, because the region of the world that we're talking about with Iran responds to strength and strength alone. Organizations like J Street have said, do not put military options on the table, which frankly I think is an important part of our diplomacy. My opponent has said that he supports J Street, and that's fine. But it does highlight a difference between our diplomacy and what will happen, I think, in the future.
Thank you. I ask you not to applaud. Congressman Dold, what do you think of the way our president handled the Libyan crisis and what should have been done?
Let me say, I think that the Libyan crisis in Benghazi, where we have an ambassador that was assassinated and 3 other Americans who were killed, is a tragedy. Around September 11th, obviously we should all be on high alert. This has now been determined as a coordinated attack at least 24 outposts of the United States around the world. I do think, at least the initial thought was in a terrorist attack, from my initial reaction. That was not what came out of the administration. But I don't want to point fingers. What I do think is alarming and concerning is the fact that it's now become, more light has been shed on the idea that Ambassador Stevens did request additional assistance, additional security forces, and especially around September 11th. That should be something that we ought to honor.
Thank you. The tragedy in Libya, the death of one of our best diplomats, reflects the difficulties and challenges we face in this region. But I want to take my hat off to President Obama for going after Osama bin Laden and showing the world, showing the world that the clock doesn't start on day 1 and we forget about justice. We will pursue justice to all ends of the earth. What happened to Ambassador Stevens was a crime. And you will see this country, regardless of who's president, go after and pursue justice and make sure it's delivered. Let me touch on another thing. My opponent is trying to mislead you. What I said about J Street is that I support J Street and AIPAC's right to communicate their vision and to be heard. But I come from AIPAC. I've been involved in AIPAC for over 30 years. What my opponent said about funding the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, he voted to cut it in half.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Now, both sides have been applauding. Can we have a little quiet now? We're going to stick with foreign policy for one more question, and I will start with Mr. Schneider. Should the playing field be leveled between the U.S. and China?
The playing field has to be leveled between the United States and China, between the United States and all of the countries in which we do business, with which we do business. We are in a global economy. There is no doubt about that, and our future depends upon it. We are 5% of the world's population. If we can invent things here, make them here, and ship them to the rest of the world, that's how we'll create the jobs here. But when we negotiate trade agreements, we need to make sure that we do it in a way that creates a level playing field, in a way that allows our companies to compete anywhere in the world. President Obama set out a goal to double exports over 5 years. We are ahead of that schedule. We need to do it over and over again. We need to invest in manufacturing in this country to bring jobs here. We have the most productive workforce, but we can't continue to have that workforce if we don't educate our young people to have the skills they need to compete in the 21st century economy. We can compete with any country in the world, but we can only do it if we recognize that we have to do it on a level playing field.
When we look at a level playing field, there's no question, and certainly as we look at manufacturing, I talk to manufacturers each and every day, right here in our district. Why manufacturing is so important is because we actually live in the second largest manufacturing district in the nation. 620 manufacturers representing over 93,000 jobs. When I talk to manufacturers, many of them say, I can't compete because they're getting subsidized in China. They're in essence dumping here into the United States. So I do think that we have to hold China accountable on letting their currency flow. I also think another big issue is talking about patent protections, which is so very, very important. And that's a problem over in China, and cybersecurity, which China has been notoriously awful with, in terms of pirating our networks here. The greatest wealth transfer has already happened, and it's done through the internet, and it's done through cybersecurity, an issue that we have to take very seriously in order to level the playing field.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to taxes. I have a lot of questions on taxes, and start with Congressman Dold. Name one of the top 10 deductions you would repeal to partially fund Romney's 20% tax cut.
I'm not sure I know about the 20% tax cut, but let me just simply say, as we talk about comprehensive tax reform, I do think that we have to eliminate the lobbyist loopholes that are out there. That, in essence, we've got to take, whether it be big oil or it be something else, eliminate the lobbyist loopholes. It's the worst type of crony capitalism we have. We have to lower those rates so that we can be more globally competitive. So people say, look, we have the highest corporate tax in the world, and we do. And I talk to businesses that are telling me, you know what, we're losing business to Canada, which, by the way, dropped their corporate rate to 15%. I do think we have to talk about how do we make ourselves more competitive, and I think that the way we do so is try to eliminate those lobbyist loopholes so we can lower the rate and make our small businesses more competitive as well.
We need comprehensive tax reform. We need to do in a way different what we're seeing from the other side. My opponents voted not once but twice for a Ryan plan, a plan that would take Medicare and turn it into a voucher program, a plan that gives millionaires an average of $250,000 of tax breaks that raises taxes on middle class by an average of $1,300. That's not the tax reform we need. We need to make sure that we can bring our budget in balance. Our expenditures are at 25%, our revenues are at 14.5%, the lowest they've ever been in our history. We need to bring the lines back together. In 1999, our last balanced budget, they touched 19% of GDP. Right? My opponent signed a Grover Norquist tax pledge, saying he would never raise taxes, never close a loophole, never eliminate a deduction. That eliminates the chance for comprehensive tax reform. But if we don't get comprehensive tax reform, if we don't bring our budget more into balance, we threaten our long-term economic future, and we threaten our kids' future as well.
Thank you. Along with that, please describe 3 specific ideas to modify and improve the tax code. Mr. Schneider.
There is no doubt that our tax code is overcomplicated. Small businesses do struggle with contradictory rules and regulations. We need, again, comprehensive tax reform to simplify the tax code, to make deductions more in line with the needs we have today. We continue to give oil subsidies to the biggest oil companies, our tax subsidies to the biggest oil companies. We need to stop doing that. We can continue to give tax breaks to companies that move jobs overseas. We need to eliminate that. We need to give tax breaks to companies that are going to invest in people, bring them off the unemployment rolls and put them on the payroll. Take them from the skills they had for 20th century jobs and teach them the skills they need for 21st century jobs. If we can do that, if we can get small companies hiring again, we can get the job growth we need again.
I don't think we're going to get small companies hiring again if we decide we're just going to tax them more. If the government's going to come in and take more from them, I don't think that's what's going to get small businesses hiring. We have 29 million small businesses in our country. If we can create an environment that enables them to have more certainty and confidence to invest in their business and grow by a single job, that ought to be what we focus on. Now, Brad just talked a little bit about trying to sign a pledge not to raise taxes. And I'll tell you, I don't believe that raising taxes is the answer. But when I went to Washington, things were worse than I even anticipated. And so when it came time for Republicans and Democrats to offer the first bipartisan budget in a generation. There were 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats that stuck their neck out to say, we'll do it. I was one of them. Because frankly, the future of the country is far too important. Putting revenues and spending cuts on the table is important. So based upon the Simpson-Bowles framework, the President's bipartisan deficit reduction commission, it was the Cooper-Latourette budget. Unfortunately, only 38 votes, but it's the right way to go.
All right, we'll continue with Simpson-Bowles. If it was put to an up or down vote, would you support it? Why or why not? And we'll start with you, Congressman.
Well, based upon the answer I gave just a moment ago, I would say yes, and here's why it's important. Running a small business, one of the things that I certainly understand is that when there's a problem in the business, what I'm looking to do is gather the people around the table that know most about the problem and have them come up with a solution to that problem. That's going to be best for my customers and for my business. Same thing's true in Washington. We can't just think it's going to be just an ideological one way or the other. Coming together, it's going to have to be Republicans and Democrats sitting together and finding a solution. During the super committee's debate, 100 of us went and signed a letter to those that joint select committee saying put everything on the table. The bipartisan budget that came to the floor, only 38 of us actually voted for that budget. But I do believe that as the fiscal cliff is coming, that's going to be the way that we get out of this mess. It's going to be Republicans and Democrats putting patriotism first and solving the problem.
First of all, Cooper-Latourette is not Simpson-Bowles. It was a plan that was put 2 days before the vote for the Ryan budget. It had $1 trillion less of revenue than Simpson-Bowles had put on the table. It gave more tax cuts than Simpson-Bowles had intended. It was not Simpson-Bowles. But 2 days later, the Congress did vote for the Ryan plan, including Mr. Dold, in a very partisan vote. A plan that would put more burden on working families while continuing to give tax breaks to those who need them the least. I know in Congress we are going to have to come together. I know we're going to have to work to find spending cuts and find revenue increases. That's what's going to be on the table. We have to do it in a bipartisan way. We have to do it in a way that everyone understands the choices we make are the right choices for the future of this country, and we can explain it in a way that will get more than 38 votes. I'm committed to going to Washington to do that. I don't know if it will be based on Simpson-Bowles, on Rivlin, Domenici. It will be based on compromise, and I will vote for it when it comes to the floor.
Let's stick with the spending cuts. Mr. Schneider, give details of specific spending cuts you would support.
So as we look at this budget, putting 25% of our GDP, we can't sustain that. The President has already talked about some of the cuts, very different than sequestration, which would be across the board and in places we don't entirely want. We need to look at defense. We need to look at a defense that stops spending the money on weapon systems made for 20th century threats and puts the money into defense systems and diplomacy for 21st century threats. We need to look at the expenditures we're making on tax subsidies. Subsidies that may have made sense in the 1930s, but don't make sense today. And we need to look at the programs we have where we're investing throughout the country. Every one of those investments, if it's not a positive return, if it doesn't provide more in return than we're spending on it, it has to be on the table. We have to say, we can't do everything. Okay? What I said before, we need a bipartisan approach, sitting down at the table, working together, and finding cuts where we can.
When we talk about Simpson-Bowles, we were before the Chicago Tribune at an editorial board when my opponent said he wouldn't support Simpson-Bowles. And, listen, I think this is going to be incumbent upon us as we look at spending cuts out there. There are going to be things that we have to cut that we don't want to. I've said that we ought to be looking at the Department of Defense and the Department of Agriculture first, because those are traditionally programs that the Republicans hold dear. We're cutting $478 billion out of the Department of Defense. Earlier this year, I led the charge to help get rid of wasteful spending out of the Department of Defense. I worked with Congressman Quigley to do the same on some naval vessels. We're going to continue to do that, but as we look at the broader framework, we have to be talking about zero-based budgeting. not just an automatic increase that's going to happen. We have to say we have to have each department go through and justify why they want their increase and why they deserve it.
Thank you. This is a question that someone posed as a personal problem. I have been manufacturing in India for some 15 years. I am now considering bringing manufacturing back to the state, Illinois. What will you do to improve my business, tax, and healthcare worries so I can justify returning to the state? And we'll start with you, Congressman.
Reshoring, I'm delighted to hear that they're considering reshoring jobs. I've visited manufacturers that are trying to do exactly the same thing. As we look at the region and our community, and you close your eyes for just a moment and just imagine if you're a business, where would you want to set up shop? First, you want to make sure that you've got a great place to raise a family, our openlands, our wetlands, the jewel of our ecosystem in the Great Lakes. We've got great educational institutions around, a great research and development corridors of top quality talent that's here. Think about it, Abbott, Baxter, Takeda, Astellas, Dow, Cardinal. So we have a great amount of pools to be able to pull folks in terms of attracting businesses. We've got great transportation infrastructure, which is really a great thing in terms of how we attract additional business. The problem is that we don't have a business-friendly environment in the state of Illinois. We decided to raise taxes 66% on individuals, 48% on businesses, and literally the next day, Wisconsin put the open for business signs up. People were fleeing to Indiana, Wisconsin, and other states. We need to turn that around, bring those businesses right back here to our country, and specifically to the 10th District.
When I graduated with an engineering degree in 1983, more than 20% of the work in this country, of the economy, was manufacturing. Today, that's down to 11%. We need to bring manufacturing back, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure, we have the workers, and we have the tax structure that allows those companies to succeed. To fail to invest in our infrastructure, China is investing 9% of their GDP in infrastructure. In Europe, the number is 5%, and yet here at home, we're 2.5%, and they want to cut it even further. We have half of our students dropping out of school before graduation, before high school graduation. We can't compete in a global economy if these kids don't have the skills to fill these manufacturing jobs. And we need to make sure that we give those companies the opportunity, incentives to bring jobs back to the United States rather than ship them overseas. And when they get them here, incentives to invest in people and give them the skills they need. That's how we get companies to come back and manufacture in the United States.
We're staying on, we're going to the global economy. As the European economies continue to struggle, we do favor bailouts to ensure that the world economy does not collapse. And we'll start with you, Mr. Schneider.
We are in a global economy. We've seen time and again over the last couple of decades, when there are problems in the world, it affects our economy here. If we want to export to foreign markets, we need foreign markets to have the opportunity to buy our products. But we need to look to foreign markets. We need to look to the European Union. We need to look to Asia to manage their own economies and do it in a way that doesn't involve false manipulation of currencies, doesn't involve in creating unfair advantages. As we work in a global economy and we lead from a position of strength, we lead from having our budgets in balance, we lead from having the best innovation and the best products, we can help those other economies. It really is, in a global economy, an opportunity for a rising tide to raise all ships. As the economy grows, as people in other countries become middle class, it's not a zero-sum game, but it's an expanding pie. And we need to make sure that the economy and the structures within the economy don't create unfair disadvantages for us.
I think as we talk about bailouts in Europe, I know, frankly, we've got $16 trillion in debt. We're borrowing 42 cents of every single dollar. Apparently, we didn't pay the electric bill here either. But I think what is important as we look at this, I think my opponent during the primary did say that he favored trying to provide assistance over to Europe. We've got some significant issues here, and we want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves at a disadvantage. And we've got to make sure that we are bringing that out of control spending right here at home. And so I do not favor a bailout. I do think that we have to talk about how do you create a robust economy here, and that I would point you to my Main Street Jobs agenda, which does focus on education, infrastructure, manufacturing, comprehensive tax reform, energy policy, and also reining in this outrageous amount of regulation that's coming in. We need regulation. We just want it to be smart regulation as opposed to volumes of it, which is paralyzing to business.
With a huge number of baby boomers retiring, what plan do you have to prevent Medicare and Social Security from running out of cash? And we'll start with you, Congressman.
Well, I think it's, as we look at Social Security and Medicare, I think first and foremost, not only do we have to strengthen our social safety, I think it needs to be there for future generations as opposed to just worried about using it today. And therefore, things I've always said with regard to that is that two things have to happen if you want to talk about any changes to our social safety net. First, you have to have bipartisan support. Second thing you have to do is you have to keep your promises to the seniors. Those that are in the system now, those that will be in the system shortly. Medicare, as we know, is going bankrupt. They said in 12 years they had to readjust it down to 10. We cannot go by way of the ostrich and stick our head in the sand and think that it will magically reappear. I do think we have to talk about how do we change it so that it will be there for future generations. I have supported a bipartisan plan. Senator Wyden and Paul Ryan came together to talk about how do we make sure Medicare will be around for future generations, and really talking about changes for those under 55. But if we don't make these changes, it's going to impact seniors today, and that I think is absolutely unacceptable.
We need to make sure that the promises we make to our seniors and future generations are in place. We need to address the long-term consequences of healthcare inflation growing at twice the rate of normal inflation. But we cannot do it by taking Medicare and turning it into a voucher, as the Paul Ryan plan, which Mr. Dold voted for twice, would do. We cannot do it by continually asking seniors to pay more and carry more burden. We talk about people who are under 55, my generation, who graduated and was told, you're going to be responsible for your own retirement. Put your money in a 401k. To buy a home, provide education for your kids. And when it was time for that generation to pay for their kids' education, the economy went completely upside down. Their 401k, as we used to joke 4 years ago, remember, became a 201k and a 101k. At the time they had to pay for their kids' education, there was no equity in their home. This generation, sandwiched between taking care of our parents and our children, many of us without equity in our home, have to have a guarantee that our programs will be there in the future.
We're going to stick with health care for a while. The U.S. spends twice as much as other countries, yet our outcomes are only in the middle of the pack. What is your recipe for health care? And I'll start with you, Mr. Schneider.
We are spending 1.5 to 2 times what other countries spend on health care without better outcomes. The Affordable Care Act takes us in a big step in the right direction, moving from a system that's based on volume to a system that's based on value. Moving to a system that provides people the opportunity to have preventative care, wellness care, and not treat everyday routine illnesses in the worst place possibly, what I'll call emergency care. Right? When you show up in an emergency room because you don't have health insurance, you haven't been able to go to a doctor, it is the most expensive place at the most expensive time. We need a system that provides people access to health care, their children access to health care, preventive care to lower our overall costs. To move from a system that continues to pay more and more and more for tests and services that don't give us any better outcomes, and reward doctors for quality care and better long-term outcomes. So that long-term we bring the cost of health care down.
Well, I do think we have to bring the cost of health care down. And certainly as we look at the Affordable Care Act, even the estimates, according to the CBO, they've doubled the cost estimates. It's not a lie, but thank you for participating. There's 21 new taxes that will be put in place. And let me just simply say, there are some aspects of the Affordable Care Act that I think are positive and need to be there. As a small business owner, there's no question that health care costs are outrageous. And they're going far outpacing inflation. But we didn't address, what we did with the Affordable Care Act was really address access to insurance. We did not address cost or quality. We didn't actually talk about medical malpractice reform, so doctors are picking up and leaving. We didn't address the ability for people to pool, like businesses to be able to pool, to drive costs down. These are some of the things that we have to do if we're serious about doing. We need to have some consumer-driven care. What does it cost to get a knee replaced? What does it cost to get a hip replaced? Shouldn't we know that ahead of time, try to drive people towards the areas that have better outcomes and pick up a larger portion of those costs?
Any more outdoors, that person is going to have to leave. Ushers, please be vigilant. Okay. How would you, to continue with that, Congressman, how would you provide health care for all?
I think health care for all is certainly the goal. But what I'm hearing from people right now, and this is really the frightening part, an enormous percentage of those that are receiving their health care receive it through their employers. I talk to employers each and every day that say, you know what, I'm ready to pay the penalty and send them off, even if I pay what it costs me for health care, to send them on their own to go get it on, in essence, on the free market. I can think of few things more terrifying than to tell someone they're on their own to go get health insurance. So I do think we have to talk about consumer-driven care. We have to talk about how do we, again, address cost and quality. Because there was a study that was done up in Wisconsin on a knee replacement. Hospital A was $57,000, Hospital B was $38,000. We associate better care with the hospital that does it for $57,000, but the outcomes actually were better at the hospital with $38,000. We should be able to steer people towards that hospital that does it for the lower cost. And guess what's going to happen to the hospital that's doing it for the $57,000? Costs are going down and outcomes are going up, or they're getting out of the business.
So we agree that we should move to a system for outcomes. The Affordable Care Act isn't perfect. No act is. But this Congress has voted 33 times to repeal, defund, and dismantle the Affordable Care Act. They have wasted 80 hours, $50 million, including a vote to repeal 2 weeks after the Supreme Court said that the Affordable Care Act was absolutely constitutional. We need to move this country forward. Healthcare in this country is a major challenge to our future. We need to move to outcomes. We need to move the opportunity for patients to understand what it costs, where they'll get the best outcome, and go to the $37,000 hospital for the better knee replacement. That's the point of the Affordable Care Act. But to have this intransigence in Washington that says we can't allow the president or the other party, regardless of which party it is, to have any successes, is exactly the challenges we face as a country and why so many of us are frustrated here at home watching what's happening in Washington.
Mr. Schneider, what are your positions on medical marijuana, legalization of marijuana, and the so-called war on drugs?
Well, I think we see each state making their own decisions on what to do about medical marijuana, and I think I'll leave it at that. But as we do look at the war on drugs, it is a border issue, it is an international issue. We need to work with our global partners, with the folks in Mexico, and make sure that we are protecting our citizens, protecting our borders, and working together to reduce the horrible violence we're seeing in Latin America. There was a report of the 10 deadliest cities in the world, and 8 of them were in Mexico and Central America, all because of this drug war. We can't let people die around the world and in this country from drug abuse. It's immoral. We need to work together with these countries to protect the citizens of their countries and the citizens of our countries from the drug war.
I think if we look at medical marijuana, certainly if there's a true medical need for it, obviously the states will make that determination. But the war on drugs is a big one. And it impacts us right here at home. Here in Lake County, actually, if you look at heroin overdoses, if you look at the map of the United States, the worst place in the country is right here in Lake County. Most people don't realize that. You choose to use heroin once, and it's in our schools, and it's prevalent around the area. It has coming across the border. Certainly, we've got citizens here in the 10th District, Peter Benzinger, who's right down here, headed up the Drug Enforcement Task Force for President Nixon and President Ford. Certainly we look to these individuals to help us, but one of the things that we do know, prescription drugs are the gateway into these other more illicit drugs, and it's a huge problem. Oxycodone and Oxycontin has to be changed the label with the FDA, and we have to crack down on these illegal drugs that are prevalent in Lake County.
We have a lot of questions on women's reproductive rights and health issues, and I'm going to ask you this question. The question is very specific about what he or she wants answered. So where do you stand on women's reproductive rights health issues? Be specific on requiring insurance coverage for reproductive services. Be specific on allowing hospitals to deny abortions. Would you allow pharmacists to deny filling prescriptions for morning after or other medications, such as family planning? Would you allow equal access for poor women? So that's 4 points there. If you can't remember them, we can go to the next question. We can roll it over. Okay.
Let me just try to start, and I'll try to be as specific as I can with regard to women's health. I want to make sure that you all hear directly from me. I want to make sure that we're protecting women's right to choose. I stood up on the House floor and was the only Republican to do so against defunding Planned Parenthood. My opponent's going to come back and say, well, then you turn around to vote for H.R. 1, which, frankly, was funding the government. We didn't want to shut the government down. So I got a letter, actually, from the head of Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards, that said, and this was after the H.R. 1 vote that he's going to criticize me for in about 20 seconds. Thank the Congressman for his unwavering and courageous support for women's health care access. I'm so grateful for his vote and ending the ability for women and against ending the ability for women to receive preventative health care at Planned Parenthood centers. I recognize the enormous pressure that your boss was under. I want to make sure, and I have stood up and will continue to stand up to make sure that women's health care is available.
I am 100% pro-choice. I always have been. Mr. Dold did stand up on the floor of the Congress on one day, and the very next day voted to defund Planned Parenthood. But he also voted a couple months later to put an increased burden on small businesses that provide health care to their employees that include abortion, treating men and women equally on full access to comprehensive health care. He voted last fall for a bill numbered H.R. 358, what the Republicans call the Protect Life Act, and the Democrats call the Let Women Die Act. This bill would have allowed hospitals to deny women a life-saving termination for abortion if it was against hospital policy to do so, not giving the woman the choice. I would not have voted for those bills. The women of this district deserve someone who will represent them in Congress all their terms, 100% of the time. There's a reason that NARAL, Pro-Choice America, gave me their endorsement, because I am 100% pro-choice.
Thank you. Mr. Schneider, we'll continue with you. Do you think we should cut family planning services both in this country and from countries to whom we get foreign aid? And what's the difference?
The difference between. I do not think we should cut family planning. Planned Parenthood, 3% of its budget is for abortion. 0% of the money it gets from government. But Planned Parenthood provides for women prenatal health care, cancer screening, preventative health care. These are the things that lead to a healthier family. In many of these families of single parents, the sole provider to those children, we need to continue to provide family planning here in this country. And I think we should continue to support it around the world. Family planning helps people decide when they want to have their children. It helps people have the opportunity, young women in Africa, Europe, other countries, developing countries, have the opportunity to get the education to provide the economic wherewithal for their families. When we make moral decisions of one sort or another, forcing life-changing consequences on people around the world, I just think that's wrong.
Family planning is important, but before we jump down that family planning path, let me just go back to something my opponent just said in the last answer, saying that, in essence, I voted to let women die. I think that, frankly, is offensive. My sister's an OBGYN, and I think for the medical professionals that are out there, to say that they've taken a Hippocratic oath that they are going to all of a sudden let women die, I think is offensive. I think it's offensive to them, and I think it's offensive to those that have taken that Hippocratic oath. As we look at family planning is something that I've certainly stood up for. I believe it's important, not just here in the United States, but abroad. And I think as I spoke before the budget committee on the priorities that are out there. Certainly family planning, Title X funding is important, and one of the things that I stood up for and said it was a priority for me that we made sure that we continued in the budget, that there was family planning dollars in the United States, through organizations like Planned Parenthood, but also abroad as well.
Thank you. Mr. Schneider, we'll start with you. We're going to switch topics. How do you stand on the Supreme Court's decision on Citizens United? Are you pro or con?
We're out of order. I don't want to go out of order, but if you want to go first, or I'll go first.
I'm happy to go first. Citizens United, when it first came out, I said that it was going to be very bad. I said that it was going to take, in essence, voices away from ordinary citizens. There would be a flood of capital that was going to be coming in through organizations and corporations, and I felt that it was most likely, at that point in time, early on, I thought it was going to be corporations who, frankly, have shareholders that will probably not allow them to do so. What we've seen is shell organizations that are putting together, obviously hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars into campaigns that will, in essence, dilute your ability as citizens to have a wider or louder voice. So I do think that what will end up happening is legislation will come through. That's something that I did in the past. I worked on campaign finance reform, and something that I think will happen legislatively in the next several years.
I think the frustration so many of us feel as we watch elections is that every day voters' voices are drowned out. And you get into this back and forth of organizations, we don't know who they are, saying things we don't know what their position or incentive or vested interest is on what they're saying. We can't have the debate between Mr. Dold and me because there are outside groups under the auspices of Citizens United who can come in and can hijack our elections. The presidential election, we're seeing a handful of billionaires trying to control the dialogue we should be having as citizens. I think Citizens United will go down as one of the worst decisions in our country's history. I was hopeful the Supreme Court would overrule it this past summer. They chose not to. I'm committed, when I get to Congress, to doing everything I can that we take back our elections, that we put the voices into the candidates and the power back into the voters, and take it away from corporations and others who aren't sharing our interests.
We're going to switch topics now. What are your positions on gun violence and gun control?
May I start? Just this morning, I opened the paper and saw that 2 young teenagers were killed in Chicago, 27 other people were shot. I think this is something where we would both agree that violence in our cities, in our communities, is a tragic dilemma, tragic phenomenon we're seeing, epidemic is the word I'm looking for, tragic epidemic we're seeing throughout our country. We need to restore the ban on assault weapons that the Bush administration let expire in 2004. We need to ban high-capacity magazines that allow someone to walk in a theater like he did in Colorado and within a minute fire off 600 rounds. We need to close the loophole that allows more and more guns to be sold without the background checks that would prevent people who are criminals or mentally insane from getting guns and wreaking violence on our communities. This is something where both parties need to come together and protect our young people and protect our communities.
I am for responsible gun ownership with reasonable restrictions. That's what I've always said. I've worked with Mayor Bloomberg and Mayors Against Illegal Guns, try to make sure that we're getting guns out of the hands of terrorists, mentally ill, felons, because we don't want to have these tragedies happen. And certainly, we're going to allow states, I think, to have more and more of a say in terms of what's right for their areas, which is one of the reasons why I voted against the one-size-fits-all concealed carry. And again, push that back down to the states. Again, that was one where I was in a small minority on my side of the aisle, but I believe it's the right thing to do. And in November, I will receive the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence Award, something that I think is important. We need to make sure that we're closing the gun show loophole. We need to make sure that we're not allowing these weapons to be able to get into the hands of people that want to do that.
Thank you. Knowing the same-sex couples do not receive equal benefits under the law, is it conscionable to continue discriminating based on sexual orientation?
One of the reasons why I actually co-sponsored a bill, one of the few Republicans to do so, talking about taxpayer parity for same-sex couples, making sure that they can get those same health care benefits as normal married couples can. And that's something that I'll continue to fight for.
So you see overlap on gun control. This is an issue where you see a wide gulf between our respective positions. I fundamentally believe that two people who want to make a life together, provide a family, should have the right to do so, period. Mr. Dold opposes marriage equality. He supports the so-called Defense of Marriage Act. I believe that people, regardless of their sexual orientation, their religion, their color, should be paid the same for the jobs that they do. Mr. Dold opposes the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And I believe, and I celebrated, when our military repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The general said it would not have an impact, and a year later, it has not had an impact. And Mr. Dold opposed repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. There are very clear differences here. I believe my opponent's on the wrong side of history. I believe as we go forward to be the country we can be, we need to have marriage equality, we need to have employment equality, and we need to have everyone in our services.
What do you think about reduction of military spending, Mr. Schneider?
Well, I think we've talked about this before. We have too many constituencies, if you will, who have a vested interest in protecting and preserving weapon systems and military programs that are focused on Cold War mentality. We can eliminate those and redeploy those dollars and reduce our overall defense spending while focusing on the very real threats we face in the world. We have serious challenges to our safety and security in this country. We have challenges that are no longer nation states, but are organizations operating within failed nation states. We need to make sure that we have the forces and the weapon systems that will allow us to protect those. But we also need to be sure that we're investing in the soft power, the diplomacy, the economic aid that can make sure that long-term countries like Somalia, like Yemen, have a potential to create safe environments and get rid of the organizations that are causing us harm.
Let me go back, if I can, just for a second. As an employer, I employ 100 people. For me, it's 100 families. There's no room for discrimination in the workplace. I don't want to see discrimination in the workplace. My opponent said that I opposed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the repeal of it. In the midst of two conflicts at the time, where those on the ground, the military commanders on the ground, said, not now, I certainly am going to take my cues from military commanders. I don't support a reinstatement of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. When it comes to defense spending cuts, we find ourselves today in a very unique position. This idea that there's going to be an additional $600 billion worth of cuts coming out of the Department of Defense. Obviously, you know the turmoil that's going on in the Middle East right now. Secretary Panetta has come to the Congress and said, we cannot do the very core basic functions that you've asked us to do if you want us to institute these cuts. Remember earlier we talked about the Department of Defense is already cutting $458 billion out of defense. An additional $600 billion could be crippling to our very core basic function to protect our citizens.
We're going to switch to the environment now, and we may only have time for 2 more questions. If we talk fast, maybe 3. The 10th District has a long history of being environmentally concerned. How will you be a leader on the environment?
Well, I have been a leader on the environment, and have been proud of the record. Stood up against my party on several things, whether it be clean air or clean water, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And just to put that into some sort of perspective, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, the President proposed in his budget $300 million. It came through out of the House at $225. I actually had an amendment to plus that up and work with Steve Latourette to get it to where the President wanted. I look at it locally. One of the things that I've been focusing on is trying to clean up the Waukegan Harbor. Working with the U.S. EPA and the Illinois EPA to try to make sure that that gets delisted. I've been recognized as the Congressional Outdoor Champion for 2011 and 2012. As a Scoutmaster and Eagle Scout, let me just tell you, it hits home. trying to protect the Great Lakes where my children swim, where I swim, where my father swam, is very important. And I will continue and always be a champion for the outdoors. Voted against trying to drill in Anwar. In fact, wrote an op-ed against it. So I will continue to be a champion for the environment.
I'm sorry, but this is just a case where the rhetoric doesn't meet the record. My opponent has voted 211 times against the environment. He did vote to allow drilling in Lake Michigan. He did vote to cut funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative by $250 million. These are the facts. The Sierra Club, the League of Conservation Voters, groups that in the past endorsed his predecessor, Mark Kirk, looked at his record and gave me their endorsement. There is a clear difference on the environment. I will protect our environment. I will make sure that the legacy we leave to our children, our natural legacy, our natural resources, our national parks, will be protected and will pass to the next generation. But I'll also make sure that the EPA, to protect our water, to protect our air, will be able to do just that, so that we have less asthma, less chronic illnesses that are causing a demand on our health care and raising costs there as well. We address acid rain in our lifetime, we need to address what we can do for climate change. There is a clear choice on the environment here.
Last question. We have several on this. How will you help to break the gridlock in Congress?
The whole reason I'm in this race, as much as anything, is because the gridlock in Congress is hurting our economy and hurting our future. We have seen a Congress that promised us jobs and a return to fiscal balance, and instead all we got was partisan bickering and debates about contraception. If we can send people to Congress who are willing to listen before they speak, people to Congress, I've taught my kids, I've told my clients, I don't need to prove you wrong to be confident in what I believe, but I'm not so certain of anything I know not to listen to what you have to say. If we can send people to Congress who will reach across the aisle, who will find areas for collaboration, even on the smallest things from the first day. Mr. Dold talks about introducing a bill a year and a half ago on the environment. 18 months later, that bill still sits there with the same two co-sponsors it started with and no progress. We need to find ways to work together and push forward and make things happen and make a difference. As we look at how do we end the gridlock in Congress, I would say first of all you have to lead by example. Before the Chicago Tribune, Brad basically said he could find no issue where he disagrees with his party. Yesterday at ABC 7, I asked him, what 3 issues would you break with your party and try to help build consensus? He came up with one on small business, which I hope the Democrats aren't opposed to small business. Time and time again, I've broken with my party, whether it be with the environment, women's health, transportation and infrastructure, you name it, gun control, education, and I'll continue to do so. I think it's important that we work across the aisle to find solutions. How about the first bipartisan budget to come to the floor in a generation? There's a leader on that. And I just want to end, if I can, from a Daily Herald in their thing that said, you know, my opponent, who just made a soliloquy a bit ago, said his willingness to blatantly misrepresent Dold's position and candidacy is troubling to say the least. It suggests that if elected, he would fall into the same reflective partisanship that stops Washington from addressing these problems.
As we finish the questions, sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. We now go to closing statements. Each candidate has 1.5 minutes, and Mr. Schneider is going first.
This election truly is a choice about priority, a choice about the direction we take this country. We have seen this past 2 years a Congress who laid out their priorities starkly and clearly to make sure that this president can have no successes upon which to hang his hat. Passing a budget that takes Medicare and turns it into a voucher program for seniors, which the AARP says will cost seniors more, which independent analysis say will cost seniors $6,400 a year, more than what they're paying today. Something that is clearly unsustainable. We have seen in this Congress, a Congress that has voted 300 times against our environment, diluting protections for our air and our water and putting our children's health at risk. We have seen in this Congress
repeatedly efforts to give more tax breaks to wealthiest Americans and subsidies to companies shipping jobs overseas while ignoring the needs of small businesses and middle-class families. We need to end the screaming across the aisle. We need to find ways to come and work together. I'm committed to doing that. I've done it my entire life. If you watched my primary, you know that I was attacked because I worked with and contributed to Mark Kirk. I have worked across the aisle for a very long time. I will continue to work across the aisle in Washington. I've spent my career helping people find common ground, establish common goals, and work together towards a common purpose. I've done it for my entire career. I'm not going to change. It's what I'll do as your congressman. Thank you for your support. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to join you today to talk about some of the critical issues facing our country. I'm proud to say that I've lived up to my vow to put people before politics and progress before partisanship to move our country forward. Independent organizations have done an analysis of my entire voting record, and all of them have ranked me as one of the most independent, bipartisan members in the United States Congress. But your homework is not to take my word for it. Go to govtracks.us. Look for yourself. Go to Congressional Quarterly, who said the #1 Republican most willing to work with the other side is me. My experience as a small businessman, someone that needs a budget and a payroll, and understanding what it's like to actually sign the front of a paycheck. I know the pressures that people are under with rising healthcare costs and regulations, and how that impacts either hiring that next person or keeping those folks employed. I was born and raised here, and I'm raising my family here. My opponent is trying to paint me out as something that you know that I'm not. And frankly, that's just unacceptable. But don't take my word for it. Take the Daily Herald, the Chicago Tribune, who have taken the time to work on Washington. They work on Springfield. They've done the analysis. What I'm here to tell you is that I'm proud of my record. This district deserves thoughtful, independent leadership, somebody with vision and leadership, someone that understands the economy and business. So whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, I ask you to cast party labels aside and join me. On November 6th, I ask for your vote.